All right, you guys. So we're here with Higher Human, and I am extremely excited to have Nicole with us today. And Nicole and I have been connected on social media for a while. It's been really cool to see her success and her growth, and all of the amazing content that she's putting out for the world. So, yeah, excited to connect and learn more about what you have going on.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me. As I said to you personally, and I've been following you for a very long time, probably about close to sort of 8 or 9 years. So it's been great following you for so long, and finally connecting. So
Yeah,
yeah, thank you so much for having me.
appreciate it. Likewise. And you're in London, or you are in?
I actually live in Madeira, which is an island of Portugal. So
Oh, okay.
we're still in UK time zone, well, the same time zone, even though it's quite fast, about a 4 hour flight. But my business is in the UK, so I'm flying to London on Monday for work. But I live here now, so we decided to just live simple, live easy.
Yeah, that's awesome. How long
Yeah.
have you guys been there?
We moved here in May. My
Oh,
partner's from here, so he was
okay.
born here, and then he moved. His mom's English. He moved to England. We met there, and we decided to move back here. So yeah.
Awesome. And how different is your life there? It's slower, it's more simple?
Yeah. So we're trying to buy a farm. We have two sort of working breed dogs. It's our own fault, but having them in England is just crazy. So we decided to come here, and it's just so much easier. I was up in the mountains this morning. So Madeira, they call it Europe's Hawaii. It literally goes from like sea to mountain, so you can be doing both within 20 minutes, which is pretty wild. So
Yeah.
I went to the mountains this morning, and I'm going to the beach after this. So it's pretty
Yeah.
great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then what
Yeah.
about the culture? Is the culture, I'm assuming, is, it's unique and different. It's
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's a lot slower. I personally don't think I could work with Madeirans, Portuguese. With all due respect to everybody that does work here, but I still work with the UK and the US, which is pretty fast paced, which is really nice because then I kind of come back to my own sanctuary, go into crazy London, kind of live that life for about a week or two, and then come back and I'm like,
yeah,
calm.
yeah,
Everything's calm. So yeah, everyone's just super chilled. I mean, in August, everything just shuts down. You can't do anything. It's great. Everyone's just
yeah.
having a good time off. They even included, so like my this is a bit random. My sister's just sent her daughter to school here actually because they've moved there as well, and they include the price of the school so that you only pay up until July, so that people don't have to have a financial commitment to August because they know that everyone goes away. So it's pretty great. They love to chill out.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me more about your story, because I've, like we said, I've been following you for a while, but I don't know your full story. I know you did work as a coach, as a trainer.
Hmm.
You've integrated all of the
Yeah.
other neuroscience and everything. So yeah, tell me a little bit more about yourself and how you got to where you're at.
Yeah, I mean, the story's pretty wild. I grew up in South Africa. So my mum is South African, my dad's Italian. And I pretty much failed high school. I didn't really ever think I'd go to university. I knew that I wanted to sort of do something with my life. So I moved over to the UK, came with one suitcase. I had an Airbnb for 4 days, and then I thought I'll just figure it out. I ended up renting someone's sofa for £5 per night for about 6 months. Complete stranger. Worked out great, which is awesome. I'm still friends with him. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And then I basically found out. So England's great because they give you an opportunity to basically redo high school as an adult. It's called an access to higher education. So you basically go back to college and you can study anything from like medicine to biomedical sciences, which I thought was crazy because I was like, oh my God, you can be a doctor with having failed high school and you can just redo it.
Hmm.
It's pretty tough, but I was pretty lucky that I managed to get in college, redid my GCSEs, which is like the stuff you do when you're 16. So I redid everything to get into university. So I started studying at 26. I went into neuroscience and I just loved it. And, having been a coach, it was quite easy because I had clients and, I had much easier sort of lifestyle with having to be flexible and stuff. So yeah, my father suffered with schizophrenia. I've had a lot of sort of alcoholism in my life, addiction, depression. My stepfather was a Marine. So, I was very fascinated with the mind and, how we can access parts of it. And yeah, I guess mental disorders as well.
Hmm. And
That's
so now
my
you
story.
yeah, now you're working predominantly privately with clients.
Yeah, so I work with I work with clients. I have a very select few clients. So, and this is what I loved. I wanted to speak to you about because you work with athletes, and it's interesting because I treat my clients like athletes
Yeah.
because they don't realize. I say to them, I'm like, you're working at a pretty high pace. You're essentially an athlete, and they're like, yeah, I guess I am. They're like executives, CEOs, stock traders. They're making high risk decisions all the time. So it's pretty interesting when I shape it like that and I help them reframe their mindset. They're like, wow, actually, I should be taking care of myself. I should be sleeping more. I should be, recovering like an athlete. So it just changes their complete perception. So I work with coaching clients, and I've just written the book. So that's predominantly now what I'm doing. And I'm still researching actually. So I basically look at decision making. So how we allocate daily energy expenditure in the brain towards decisions and what takes sort of our attention away from how we can make those decisions better or worse by the end of the day. So vigilance decrement. So, you start up with a set amount of decisions and then or attention, if you will, and then it kind of decrements throughout the day. So how can we improve that? And at the moment, I'm looking at how social media impacts brain energy expenditure. So, people have an energy allocation to what they can spend in a day. I call it a kind of like a mental currency. If you're then going and spending your energy on social media, and I don't want to bash social media because I'm on it. It's done great for me.
Yeah.
But just paying attention to how much of your energy you're spending on these things. And then, so like for example, I don't look at any social media for about an hour before working out because my workout is completely different if I've just been on social media versus if I haven't been on social media, because dopamine levels are going to be compromised if I've been scrolling endlessly, and if you're in the comments arguing with people and etc., it's just going to be taking energy away from you. So then it's like energy that you then can't put back into your life for yourself, for the things that you would like to do. So all of a sudden you start compromising on the meditation that you should be doing, the hydration that you should be forgetting that you even need to do, and all of these extra things. You start going to bed later, you decide to eat junk food instead of cooking for yourself. So how can we improve the way that you make decisions so that you can then optimize your life and essentially be better, more efficient, if you will?
Yeah. No, it's really interesting. So do you feel like with social media, it's so important, especially if you look at the younger population, that these type
Yeah,
of tools are taught? I mean, obviously,
yeah,
that's what you're studying, that's what you're interested in. And if we don't educate the younger population on this, like it's extremely troubling because of the lack of ability, the lack of attention, the
yeah,
comparison, the all
yeah.
of these things that can come
Yeah.
from being stuck on your digital device.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if you think about it, we've got a couple of networks in the brain. We've got two major networks. One is a central executive network, which is responsible sort of outward thinking, scrolling on your phone, planning, future planning, your work, problem solving. And then you've got the default mode network. So that's access when you're more creative, when you're meditating, when you're going into that internal thought and like pondering life, essentially is exactly where the word comes from, is default mode network, which is your default mode of thinking.
Mhm.
Those are like that chitter chatter, that voice in the back of your head. But we can essentially program that chitter chatter to think and talk to ourselves in a particular way based on the things that are externally influencing us, like social media. So, we spend a lot of time in this kind of central executive network, constantly scrolling, constantly outward thinking, and we don't spend enough time going inwards. But then when we do, this is my theory anyway, it's kind of like diluted by the rest of the world's input. And I
Mhm.
think it's a really valuable skill to be able to just shut off from the world and think, what am I thinking about? Like, what do I want for myself? What are my values? Who am I? Who am I with when none of this exists, when all the layers are peeled away? I think it's a really important skill to have. And I think children need to be taught that there's such a major influence from the things we see, the things we consume, the media that we engage with,
Yeah.
you said
So
comparison.
in your life, what would you say as you've been researching and learning and growing in these aspects? What are some of the most important pieces for you personally? And then I want to expand that. And if you're coaching somebody else, and obviously it depends on the person, but then
Mm.
how do you end up uh, teaching people and coaching people to build on those skills?
Yeah. Well, in sort of relation to social media, I would say that the two things that I think for me are non-negotiable, and just because I'm saying them doesn't mean I'm perfect and I do it every day, but first hour to hour and a half of the morning, try not to look at your phone. If
Mm.
you're like jacking up that dopamine first thing in the morning, it's like, it's like, I don't know what drives dopamine really high. If you start drinking alcohol at 8 in the morning, you're going to want to drink for the rest of the day. Okay, and it's the same thing with social media. If you start so early in the morning, you jack up your dopamine really high, and then you're on that chase for the rest of the day.
Mm.
So it's interesting because on the days that I do that, I can feel myself at the end of the day like scrolling, kind of like I know that I should get off, but I can't. I'm just
Okay.
like stuck in this like cycle, and then not checking your phone for at least an hour, ideally two before bed. So I would love to, in an ideal world, like even just switch my phone off at 7 o'clock and just not touch it. Like no one needs me at that time, I
Right.
need to be with my family. I want to be with my partner. I want to be with my dogs. I want to like read a book. And I do read. I read quite a lot, which is great. But those are the two things that I think have a major impact on the rest of our daily, the vigilance that I was talking about, how we make decisions, and then also our mental health, because it allows 2.5 hours, let's call it 3 hours of space for you to do something that's not engaging in social media.
Hmm.
Engaging in something that you could do for yourself, like working out. People always tell me they don't have time to work out, and I'm like, okay, how much time do you spend on social media? And I know it sounds cliche because you can check social media for 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, but you know what? 10-minute workout is still better than 20 minutes on social media. So
Right.
can
So
always fit it in.
yeah, so to take that even further, for somebody that's habitually like, their phone is their alarm, it's right by their bed. Like you suggest they put the phone in the other room, and I mean get a
Yeah,
traditional alarm clock, like literally like
yeah,
these little
yeah,
steps, it can make that more realistic.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is the other thing. So I have one of those Lumi lamps that essentially mimics a sunrise, and my phone is definitely in another room because it's when it's in the room, the temptation is there, right? So we can't fault ourselves, and the worst thing that happens is we do it anyway and then beat ourselves up about it, because beating ourselves up about it gives us a sense of control over the situation. So
Hmm.
then the brain learns it doesn't matter if I fail because I'll just beat myself up about it, and then I'll take control of the situation like that. The brain's a bit sort of tricky like that. We find ways. So people kind of like to end up being upset because they can't do it, or it's hard, but it is hard. And the brain does what it does best. And what's best is what's been repeated. So if something's been repeated for, X amount of years, how long have you had a phone for? And every morning you check it, it's going to be a pretty tough, habit to break. But the easiest way to do it is to just put it in another room,
Right.
remove that temptation, get an alarm clock, and go old school. Read a book in the morning to wake up.
Yeah, sit outside, get some sunlight, and just
Absolutely.
yeah, what I've realized in my life, I'm not a habitual person. I'm not, that's not my natural tendency to be. Um, I'm more of a fuel person. So I have to
Okay.
really think about creating processes and habits in my life.
Yeah.
But I find recently I've thought a lot about integration and how do I, it's like, who do I want to be? Where do I want to get from a growth perspective? And then
Yeah.
how do I actually integrate it in my life?
Yeah.
And for me, if I can create a little slower morning, if I, whether that's
Mm,
get up a little bit earlier or just not schedule clients, start my day a little later, get
yeah.
outside,
Yeah.
sip some water, drink some water, have a coffee,
Yeah.
have some sunlight. It's amazing how much
Yeah.
better my day feels. Um,
Absolutely.
and I do a decent job with my phone, but I could do a better job of just putting it
Yeah.
away. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we all can. And like this morning, I made a point of putting it on airplane mode and leaving it upstairs because I was like, it's Saturday. Who's going to need me on a Saturday? I know we had this call, but I knew that it was
Yep.
at 4 o'clock. So it is definitely, it's hard because we also learn through reward. We learn through pleasurable experiences, and the phone is a pleasurable experience. So to break it is
Yeah.
extremely hard. And that comes down to routine. So not every habit becomes a habit, but every routine can become a routine. So it's
Hmm.
routine for me to wake up, leave my phone where it is, but it isn't a habit
Yeah.
because it's easier to grab the phone. That's where the
Mm.
reward is,
Yeah.
right? So
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, and I would say with you, with like the routine situation, you said you're trying to do that. I love having a routine because it takes away that decision fatigue. I want to make as little decisions in the morning so that I can leave the decisions for the time where I'm needed to make decisions.
Right.
Like at work or with clients or with whatever. But if I have to decide whether I'm going to brush my teeth now or after, I work out, or whether I work out now or work out later. That's another decision that I've got to take into consideration. Whereas if I get up, I don't grab my phone, I read my book. So my routine is normally read a book, get up, work out first thing at around 6 a.m. I've not been doing it the last few weeks because I've been handing in my book and I've just fallen off the bandwagon completely. But when I do that and I worked out and then I walk the dog straight after, it's already 8 o'clock and I've done everything that I needed to do that morning. Now I can sit down and actually do my work. I finish work at 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then no one hears from me for the rest of the day. I'm going to the beach with my dogs. I'm going for a walk. I'm doing whatever I want. So people always think that like I'm crazy for working out at 6 a.m. and starting work so early. But I'm like, yeah, but I get to finish at 2 o'clock. You know, I
Yeah.
work smart. I work deep instead of working long.
What would you say about someone? So again, I'll use myself, and my schedule, it fluctuates a lot, right? It's running a
Yeah, mine too.
business. I have, personal clients, but they do move around. So my workouts aren't always at the same time. And so in that situation, is there a way to have that routine in that schedule, but also allow flexibility, or is that still?
I think it depends, right? Because for me, working out, and I shouldn't say this as a coach, I find it really hard. Like I have to really like amp myself up to do it. Whereas like my partner can just do it at any time of the day. He'll get it done at like 9 o'clock at night. If he hasn't done it, he will do it at 9 o'clock at night just to make sure that he's had it in. Whereas I'm like, oh, look at that, it's 6 o'clock, time's up. I'm not going to work out now. And that's the worst mindset to have. So I know that I have to check myself. And the way that I check myself is to schedule it in at every time of the day. If you're diligent enough to be able to do it at any time of the day, then great for you. I can, but I start bargaining with myself. I'm like, okay, well, what if I just do half hour today and then I go for a longer walk tomorrow? And that's the kind of like mentality that I have around working out. So for me, it just has to be done. First thing, there's no excuses. I can't, by the end of the day, I've come up with 10 reasons why I shouldn't. Whereas in the morning, it's like one, I'm tired, but everyone's tired. So just get up and do it.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to say with the phone being put away, what's interesting is, Sugar Sean O'Malley is one of my athletes, we just won a world title, which is really cool.
I know. So my partner is like, oh my God, Sugar Sean O'Malley just won. And I was like, why does that name sound familiar? And then we went on his profile and I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
This is crazy. So,
and he's a very interesting just human, and obviously a skilled athlete. But one of the things that he did this last camp, and this was his, he did it himself. And I'm assuming he heard it on a podcast, or but he didn't check his phone for, I don't remember what his exact strategy was, but it was like 3 hours in the morning. So he let me know. He's like, hey, I always check on in the morning. How are you feeling? What's going on? And he just said, hey, B, I won't get back to you until, whenever that'll be, because I'm just not even going to look at my phone in the morning. And I was like, that's an awesome strategy. And he felt really good doing that. And for him, I hadn't even thought about that the decision making, the decision fatigue, because he had so much going on and there was so much pulling him that for him to just create that space to meditate, to breathe, to get sunlight, when it helped him with his day, which is really cool.
I love that. And the way that I kind of see that is I teach it in two different ways. So we've got HRV, which is your heart rate variability. And it kind of like then mimics the kind of metaphor for life. Now hear me out. If you have a spider web and there are things that are pulling on it, that's tensegrity. That's going to start pulling in one direction. Something else is going to have to give, right? So that's what happens with your HRV. So you are tired, you're hungry, you're maybe a little bit ill, your HRV goes down, your central nervous system is less readily available to move and to act in whatever fashion it needs to, sympathetic or parasympathetic. And that's the same thing with the things that are taking up space up in our lives. So social media, if you've got the spider web and that's your life, what are the excess things that are pulling on that web that don't need to be pulling on a particular day? Like when Sugar Sean has got a competition, and he's got a fight. He doesn't need social media. That's just unnecessary pulling on that spider web, right? So I always say to my clients, what are the things that you can get rid of? What are the things that you can streamline? So when you have to make a stock trading decision at X amount of time during the day, your brain is just firing for that particular thing, because you've not had to decide about what shake you're going to have in the morning because it's a shake that you have every single day. You're not going to think about when to take your supplements because you take them at every single time of the day. And, you know, social media is going to jack up your dopamine again. So you want that dopamine instead for your decisions, not for some, you know, content that's not really going to provide any useful, you know, things to your life. So I love that. And one of the reasons why I actually had a look at Sugar Sean, and I love what you guys are doing, is the mindset stuff, because I really truly believe that that is what differentiates athletes. It's one of the reasons why I'm obsessed with Djokovic. He's my favorite tennis player. And I see that with every athlete that really, you know, is successful, is how they approach their day, their mind, and see their mind as essentially like, the way that I explain is like, if your mind is your brain is your hardware, your mind is your software. You need good hardware for the software to, you know, upgrade and to work properly. And a lot of people don't take that into consideration. So I think that's really what differentiates athletes and my clients essentially from the average, if you will.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's what draws me to it. Really, what draws me to you and the conversation is that when you know, I've been very fortunate to have top athletes in, you know, almost every sport, you know, UFC, baseball, football, hockey, golf, and at the top, the top of the top. Because to be there, to be at the elite, you have to have the physical skills. You've been, let's say, gifted with a certain, you know, physical attributes. You've built those skills through thousands of hours of practice. You've done that work. But at the very top, it's all here. And in observing these athletes, and in particular Sean, because MMA is fascinating to me, because it's, the consequences are so extreme. I mean, every time they fight, it's like a Super Bowl, and it's one-on-one. Like it's a fascinating sport. The mind is the key, and I think there's a relationship to fear that is very important. That at the top, there's more of a welcoming of it's, instead of pushing it away, instead of creating fatigue from that drive away, there's a bring it in. There's this presence that these athletes possess that is fascinating. How they deal with negative talk, with the mental demons. So I mean, talk more about that. So let's say you're working with an athlete that is elite, and they're struggling with, call it mental demons, call it, you know, negative self-talk. What, you know, from a process of teaching them to deal with that, what would be some suggestions or some thoughts, some ideas?
Definitely education around that. So, you know, it's easy for us to revert to negative and automatic negativity because we have a negativity bias. So we've seen it through, you know, various studies, and predominantly through economics. Loss aversion shows us that our losses, we feel them 3 times more than our gains. So I use this as an example every time. So if you get like one really negative comment on your Instagram, but 3 really positive ones, you're most likely going to go to bed worrying about that one negative one, right? So through evolution, we have been wired to essentially pay attention to negatives more. So it's natural that these things happen, but we can change that, right? So a lot of the times when people understand that, they already have like, okay, compassion. I'm allowed to think this, but you can kind of become an observer of those thoughts. The second thing is, I always tell my clients they need to basically regulate their central nervous system back down. So if you are thinking negatively, your anxiety is high, maybe you've even triggered a stress response. Not everyone does every time they think negatively, but sometimes it can. You know, that's going to then put you in a sympathetic state, and it's hard to reason in that state because, you know, limbic systems, the emotional brain takes over and logic kind of goes out the window. The logic brain is part of the neocortex, neo meaning new. So it's a much more newer part of our brains. It's what differentiates us from other animals. We have a much more developed neocortex, but it's new. So that kind of gets overridden by those emotional thoughts that want to essentially keep us alive because they're part of a survival mechanism. So regulating your central nervous system back down through breath work. Huberman talks about the physiological sigh all the time. Quickest way to regulate yourself back down, bring that, state into a parasympathetic state, and then you can kind of reframe. So I always ask my clients, fact or fiction, when you're in that state of more logic, that's when you can kind of go, okay, is this factual or is it fiction? Is it something that you're kind of telling yourself because for whatever you want to catastrophize, you're thinking about fear in a particular way. And I love what you said about fear, because every athlete that you hear, they invite the fear in. They fear and they do it anyway, and they love it in some respect.
Yeah.
And that's what I try and teach everyone, because without fear, none of it would be worth it. If the world didn't knock you about, there would be nothing to fight for.
Yeah.
Right? If there wasn't a fear, we would all be doing it.
Yeah. It drives both.
Yeah. So, reframing that when you're in a more positive, like more of a neutral mind state is easier, because when you're jacked up with sort of hormones and emotional brain thinking, it's easy to catastrophize and go down really negative routes. And generally speaking, when people reframe in that mind state, like more logical, you can do that through even journaling, because then, it's quite interesting. So when we think about words, the whole brain lights up. And it goes part of that default mode network I was talking about earlier. But the problem is that those thoughts don't have a beginning and an end. There's no coherent kind of sentence structure. They're running around seemingly unwarranted and without real structure. I've said that already. But when we engage, we have to either generate words, or we have to write them, or we have to speak them, we engage different parts of our brains that are much smaller, especially when we have to write something down, because then we're engaging the neocortex again, which is again the logical brain. So then you start realizing that when you're writing it down, you rationalize, and you're like, okay, actually, this was either maybe blown out of proportion, or it is true, but it doesn't matter because it can't be changed. Maybe you do have the fear, but so what? And does that make sense? Does that help at all?
Yeah, no, for sure. I've never thought about why journaling works and why it feels. I mean, it makes sense to me that we're getting things out, but I never thought of it that when you write it down, there is you can see a beginning and an end to a thought, and it starts to create, I mean, with my experience, it starts to create space. I feel like if I'm going through something stressful, especially if it's emotional stress, you can feel trapped. And it's, what do I do with this? How do I fix it? How do I solve it? And when I can get away from it, it looks more manageable, right?
It's got a beginning and an end.
Yeah.
That's literally it. It's comprehensive. But when it runs around in our mind, it isn't. There's no coherence to it, even though it makes sense to you. But as soon as you try and get it out, it's the same reason why people, when they write something, they're like, oh, I know what I want to say, but I don't know how to say it. You're engaged in different parts of the brain. And as soon as you can kind of rationalize that, you start to realize that actually it is just a thought in your brain that's running around, trying to keep you alive from whatever it is it's trying to keep you alive from. But there's no need to survive. You can get that thought out, think about it, and realize that maybe it's not true. And if it is true, again, most things can be changed. No one's really trying to change the hard wiring of their breathing mechanisms. They're just trying to change thoughts, habits, patterns, behaviors.
Yeah, I find that meditation it's benefited me in so many ways, but probably the main one is this ability to witness my thoughts, the narrative, and to not attach to it, to see it as just this thought that's presenting itself for whatever reason, and to understand that it's just a thought, to see it, and then to come back into being present, or to focus on the breath, or focus on something else. It's so simple, but it's also so hard. And that's, I always tell people, is meditation can take you really, really far. Like, I mean, it's a never ending process. It's this journey, but the basic premise is just this ability to be less reactive, and to observe yourself, and to note it, to have awareness of your thinking, and then to just come back. Right.
Yeah. And I love that you said that, because I always say that, like, meditation basically gives us that space where we make the decision to either react or respond. And I think that's a really valuable skill in life, because oftentimes we have been taught trigger response, and that response might be a reactivity. But if you can create that space between, you know, that response and the trigger, whatever that response is, whether it's an actual response or a trigger or a reactivity, you begin to sever those co-firing neurons. So if you think about it, things happen in sequence in the brain.
Yeah.
And mental heuristics are shortcuts. So if you've practiced a particular thing every day in, day out, your brain is going to do that every single time without thinking about it, because it's trying to save energy for other things. So the way that I make my coffee is exactly the same every day. It's quite funny because my partner bought this kind of like whizzy thing where you kind of like froth up the milk, and you have to just fill it up halfway, put the little machine in, froth it, and then fill it up. I've been filling up the mug all the way up for like 20 years. How long have I been drinking coffee for? And I knew to do that. I woke up and I was like, okay, don't fill up the thing halfway, don't fill up the thing all the way. And I swear I still did it. And I was like, oh my God. Because that's mental heuristics. Like your motor, like your body, your limbs are doing what has been practiced for so long. It's a reason why Sugar Sean can make a kick without even thinking about it. He knows exactly what he needs to do without really consciously thinking about what he needs to do, because it's ingrained in his pattern of behavior and, you know, habit. So back to your point, what was the point of this? Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, meditation and
meditation.
Yeah,
exactly. It helps create that space that you can essentially change those patterns. So if this is obviously a really lame example, but if I wanted to change the way I make coffee, I can. And meditation can actually help us in our lives by creating that space between how we make decisions, how we react to things. So we observe things. Yeah.
So okay, here's a question for you then. So I think of reaction, and then instead of saying non-reaction, I think of wise action. So I think of
I like that.
Wisdom embodied is wise action. Okay, that's how I think of it, and I agree with you that meditation has, in my experience, has taught me to give things space. And it's such a subtle, like, I mean, it's like this barely this any space that exists. And I'm now wiser in my actions. I'm less yanked around. Mental energy I'm better because I'm not getting yanked. But how would you explain that to an athlete, let's say in MMA, when it is a reaction, right? So, they're cultivating this stillness, they're cultivating this ability to conserve energy and to be again, less yanked around so that their energy can go to what they want it to go to. But say in a sport, again, MMA, you're reacting to a movement. Like, do you think that space still exists, or that the decision making, the neural processing in the brain just becomes even more efficient with that kind of practice? Does that make sense?
I think I'd need to delve into some literature, but from, anecdotally, from what I'm thinking is, I think it allows us to allocate that space if we need it. Okay? So that we then generate that space in times where it's necessary, rather than, like, let's look at it as an example of like blowing up and getting angry, versus like responding to something more coherently with more kind of like, wisdom, as you said. So, in some things you want to be reactive. You want that automatic thing to kick in. You don't want Sugar Sean to be like, should I punch left or should I punch right? You want him to kind of make that decision as a heuristic. But in situations where maybe like the decision is not as like black and white and maybe requires a bit more nuance, I think that's where it's really valuable. That's where that kind of ability to think and make that decision and create that space is really important.
So potentially,
does that help?
Yeah. And I think I go back that something you said really early on of this, I don't remember the exact word, but like the mental fatigue, that if you look at, say, a day, if that's our constraint is a day, and a person is conserving energy in other aspects, like they, again, when they go to make coffee, they don't have to think about it. It's there. If they, if, they're not on social media and they're not wasting that energy in that way. When they're in, say, a fight as an MMA fighter, there's less fatigue. Available. That's probably how I would think about it. And that, we know, right, when somebody is like stuck in a sympathetic state, their reaction time is less, their decision making is worse. If somebody's just
Yeah.
like stuck in sympathetic all the time,
Yeah.
there's less energy when they need it.
Yeah.
That's how I would think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And and like everything we do requires energy in some form or another, and which is, if we break it down to its, smallest molecule, it's ATP.
Yeah.
So if you're using that energy currency for every other thing that's not important in your life, especially on a day like fight day,
Yeah.
you're just throwing money, currency, mental currency, at
Yeah.
a thing that's, useless.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's super interesting is just how all of this really, from my perspective, it's being a better human, right?
Yeah.
It's being
Yeah.
more tuned into what you're doing and being able to pay attention to what matters to you, and then how that, as a CEO, as an athlete, like
Yeah.
it's all the same stuff.
Yeah.
There's such a convergence from my perspective as a coach, as a human, that these things matter to all of us. And that's
Mm,
what's cool with athletes, is because it's a really cool testimonial for,
yeah.
look, if you're trying to operate at the highest level, if optimal performance matters, and it should matter to all of us, if we're a father,
Yeah.
if we're a partner,
Yeah.
we're a right,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
we want to be
Yeah.
tuned in. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Like, none of this is exclusive to just CEOs and athletes. This everyone should be in control of their life, in the driver's seat, saying, "This is what I want to spend my currency on, and this is the decisions I want to make. I want to respond with wisdom." I love that, instead of reacting, because so many people kind of feel like they're just a slave to what their brain does, without realizing that they actually have a lot of power to change it.
Yeah. Well, that's a cool segue into your book, right? So your book is Rewire, right? Or
Yeah, yeah,
Wired.
exactly.
Yeah. And
Rewire. Yeah.
Rewire. Okay. And it is out. It's not out. Like, how do we get this? How do I get,
Yeah, it's
where's
not
my
out.
copy?
Yeah, I'm going to send you a copy, because I think there's so many things in there that I think you're going to really enjoy. You're going to be able to translate into, training with your athletes. Things like visualization. I've gone down a rabbit hole on, athletes that use that. Michael Phelps, I don't know if you ever heard of it, like his famous story, but basically him and his coach visualized all the possible things that could go wrong in a race.
Yeah.
And they visualized that his goggles could come off. And that's exactly what happened. He was at the 2008 Beijing Olympics, and he won record where he broke the record of winning 8 golds on that
Yeah.
day. And on the 100-meter butterfly, he dove in and his goggles came off, and you can hear the commentators kind of going, "Oh my God," as I said, like, we thought he was going to do it. Oh no, 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 no. And actually he turns it around. He wins anyway. And they're like, wow. When they chat to him and his coach at the end, they said, well, no, they knew that could happen. So he was prepared, because when we don't take things into consideration and they do arise, they kind of sideline us. They like throw us off. But if
Right.
you're prepared, you know how to respond. So he knew that could happen. He knew how to respond because he practiced it. He knew exactly how many strokes to take before he had to tumble turn. And he basically swam blind and won, which I think is amazing. And we can translate that into everything in our life. So, visualizing like the things that could go wrong in our life, of being prepared for them. So you want to let's break this down to somebody who's maybe listening to this podcast and isn't an athlete, but they want to pick up a new habit. Taking into consideration things go wrong. Like, my dog could, I don't know, wake me up. My kids make me tired. Like, I end up coming home and I want to smoke instead of going for a run, whatever. But if you visualize yourself not doing that, visualize what the things that could go wrong when they arise, you're better prepared. So you knew that your coach might cancel on you, but you know that he could do that. So you're going to go to the gym anyway, instead of being like, that's my
Yeah.
cue, to
So
not go.
so basically you're preparing yourself for that situation, so that if it does happen, you already
Yeah.
have a solution, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because the brain wants to go where it's been before. So things that happen to us that we haven't experienced before, we normally then respond with automatic. So like, your coach cancels on you, then your automatic is like, you know what, I'll just skive out and not go today. Whereas if you practice, no, he might cancel, but I will go anyway, you're more likely to go. So
Yeah.
mental rehearsal is really important. And, mentally rehearsing your day as well, like winning. It doesn't just need to be setbacks and negativity or, negative outcomes. And then people always ask, they always say, well, like, what does that mean, that I'll start like catastrophizing, becoming anxious, worrying, thinking about the worst? But the difference is that when you do this as like an activity, as a task, it's goal directed. it's outcome and like solution based. So you're engaging a different part of the brain. When you're doing this in a state of rumination, that's of course, going to lead you down a rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm.
So Rewire is essentially, it's for everyone and anyone, and it predominantly for people who've got that chitter chatter in the back of their minds, the things that have been programmed by the people before them. So parents telling their kids that they were this or they were that, and not allow them to essentially explore what they really wanted to be. So then, people go off on a trajectory of becoming who their parents told them to be without realizing the influence that kind of like childhood conditioning had on the way that they think. So, the things that hold us back, the self-negative talk, the limiting beliefs, how we can break through them. And I talk so much about the things we've spoken about today, like fear, how to get through it anyway. And I use Djokovic as an example as well. And I'm fascinated with fighters as well. I mean, it's one of the things that I talk about as well. There was an amazing study that they looked at the Wim Hof method. They basically saw that through cold water exposure and breath work, what was happening is, so normally your adrenaline then triggers noradrenaline or norepinephrine, you guys call them epinephrine in America, to set off. So when you're physically stressed, you're also mentally stressed. So these two sort of compounds are released in tandem, or in conjunction, sorry, not in tandem. But what was happening is through cold water exposure is that over time, the adrenaline was going high in the body when they were in the water, but the noradrenaline in the brain was staying low. So basically, they were jacked up with adrenaline, ready to go, but their minds were super calm. And that's why I'm fascinated with fighters. I'd love to put one, like, study them in an experiment, but that's the perfect example, because the body is literally fighting somebody, like Sugar Sean in an octagon ring, but his mind is, okay, obviously not, the calmest, like when he's in a meditation, but much calmer than I would be. If you put me in a fighting ring, I'd probably like freak out and like curl into a ball because I'm not used to that. But his brain is able to regulate that mental state while the body is extremely high with adrenaline, which is not normal, So if we can increase those thresholds for stress through cold water, through exercise, through saunas, whatever, it means that we're raising our threshold for emotional stress in our daily life. So now all of a sudden your colleague doesn't piss you off the way that they did 3 weeks ago before you started doing cold water exposure. So
no, that's it's so it's fascinating. And go back to Sugar. He's done an ice bath literally every day for 5 years. Like to him, because we've talked about this a lot, I think a lot of it is just it's hard, and it's just something he does, and he's consistent with it. And when he, gets out, he feels better, but he's able to stay calm in that environment, which makes a ton of sense. My experience with doing ice baths is it's again, this ability to welcome something that's uncomfortable, this fear, and to really like open to it. That's how I think about it. I think about it from the perspective of, okay, there, you can just not do it, which you're not going to get anything from it. You can endure it, which is this person that, they're in it and they're, oh, I can do this. And and then there's this other level, which is actually welcome, like feel it. And I see it as this opportunity to feel, to go inward and feel. And I never had thought about it from that perspective, but that makes sense with my experience, that you're feeling something, you're feeling a hormonal response. And if you can quiet your mind, or I don't even know if it's quiet, it's work with your mind, it's observe, see it, right? And then the breath is a piece of that. You're increasing your tolerance for that physical stress while staying still focused. That's really cool.
Exactly. And that translates into other things, right? Because you've got resistance towards wanting to go in an ice bath. You do it anyway. Like you said, you allow it, you welcome it, you befriend it, whatever you want to call it. That means that the next time that something else challenging comes along, you're like, I can deal with this. Because people want to avoid problems. They don't want to deal with stress. They don't want to deal with their thoughts. I was going to mention that earlier as well. People are afraid of their thoughts. You were talking about meditating, observing these negative thoughts, realizing that they're not who you are. But people are like, oh my God, I don't want to think about these things. Push them away. push them away, avoid the ice bath, don't go running, don't do this, don't feel the fear. But we can't do that. Stress is a part of our daily lives. And I tell my corporate clients that, they're like, yeah, I never thought of that. We need stress to do things. We need stress to run, to think, to have this conversation, to have sex, to have enjoyable things,
Yeah.
Stress can be a good thing. It's just how we regulate ourselves and how we essentially reframe our mindset towards it. When I say that, people are like, yeah, I didn't think about that.
Right. Yeah. So hypothetically, or your perspective, if you were to have the, say identical twins, and they both do ice baths, and everything is the same, which that's not the case, but
yeah,
see where I'm going with this. And
I hear you.
they do an ice bath every day for 90 days, let's just say. And one person is practicing calming their mind, breath work, and the other person is just doing the ice bath. They're just checking the box. They're doing it. Do you think the result would be very different?
Yes.
Yeah. So again, how they're working with their mind in that environment is really the key, right? It's not just the exposure to the environment. It's the mental physical connection, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you about a study that will blow your mind. So Elia Crum, she's a researcher from Stanford, I believe. She's amazing. She basically looks at mindset. And they did a study where they basically told one group that this milkshake that they were about to drink was like super calorific. It was like really indulgent. They use words like indulgent, decadent, like the picture had like cream on it and cherries, and it was just like this amazing looking thing.
Yeah.
And then they told another group that this was a sensible shake. It was like low calorie, zero sugar. You'll probably be hungry again in a few hours. And then they looked at their ghrelin response. So ghrelin is responsible for telling your brain that you're not hungry, that you're full. So the individuals that had this massive shake, up to 90 minutes later, their ghrelin levels were much higher than the group that were told that this shake was low calorie. So the group that were told that the shake was low calorie were essentially hungry hormonally, not just mentally, but the signals in their body were saying that actually we need to eat again because we didn't eat enough an hour ago. And that is wild because the shakes had the same amount of calories in them. So the physiological response was different depending on the mindset that they had towards the food, right?
Yeah. I mean, again, the mind, right? It's the, your psychology will follow your physiology will follow your psychology.
Exactly.
Right? The loop can go both ways.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
And the placebo has a 70 up to 72% cure rate. People are always like, oh, but what about placebo? And I'm like, let's not shun the placebo, because if it's working, if you're taking an omega-3 capsule every day and you believe that it's working, and it has benefits, then, I'm not saying like go and ingest any old supplement just for the sake of right. But our mindset really does matter. And people hate it when I say that. They're like, oh, it's so toxically positive. But I work with people who are willing to take that on board. People like, I'd love to work with someone like Sugar Sean, who like listens to what I say. And that's what I work with, people who are like, yes, this is the kind of energy I need, not the Instagram kind of like warriors that come and tell me that I'm being, toxic because I'm saying that mindset matters. And mindset really, really, it does.
Yeah.
Say what you want.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're definitely you're attracting the right type of person. And there are so many people out there that are just hungry for growth, right? And hungry for change. That's where I'm at in my career is I just want to work with people that want to change, whether that's a professional athlete or not. To me, I love athletes because of the challenges that presents. But of course, really it's life is short. Like, to me, growth is such an important experience, is such an important part. Like, why not be better at tuning in? Why not be more effective, efficient at managing stress? So I
completely agree. I don't know, and there's so many things to learn about, and I can go to a bit woo with this, but I remember having this kind of like revelation when I was about, early 20s, and I remember like going through a phase where I was learning a lot. And I remember, did you ever watch that documentary with Carl Sagan where they sent like Voyager 1 and 2 into space? Basically, they sent up these like spaceships into space but they had to time them so perfectly that they would basically ricochet off each planet, because there was once in every 300 years they would be perfectly aligned, so there was enough sort of momentum to keep the spaceship going, because there wasn't enough fuel to get it out into out of our solar system. Okay, so that's already like, yeah. And then secondly, they put these like golden records on there in case anyone ever found them. It would tell them about our world and like what was happening. That spaceship traveled for 42 years before it even left our last planet. I think Jupiter. I can't remember my astronomy very well. Whatever. Neuroscience here, but not anyway. And I was like, there's so many things to learn. There's like a spaceship that's been traveling the entire time that I've been worrying about my body. Okay, I remember having this real like conundrum with my body, and I wasn't even overweight or anything. And I was just like, I need to get out of my own head and stop worrying about this shit, quite literally, plain and simple, because the world has so much to offer. There's so much to learn. There's so much to gain from it. Why am I berating myself about the way that I look when I'm athletic and I'm healthy?
Yeah, it's what's cool about this type of connection, and again, social media has allowed this. There's a lot of positives, but to me, it's like life is short, and for the most part, I think most of us are trying to do our best to figure it out, whatever that means, to enjoy it, to have connection, and it's hard. It is hard. So it's these type of conversations. Again, the content that you're creating, your book, it's powerful. I mean that, and it'll change people's lives. Like that's kind of out of your hands, right? You're creating it. You put it out into the universe, and who knows who's going to read it, how it's going to impact people's lives. But to me, that's so important. Because I get up every day and I'm just, I'm trying to make a difference. I'm trying to grow myself, which is that's a challenge in itself. But, that's my, I guess that's my, my mission with, what I'm doing is to try to, I do it because I am fascinated with it. I'm curious about it. And it's, cool to connect and to spread the love, if you will,
Yeah. I love it. And you know what it shows, because I think you're doing an amazing job. I mean, I remember people telling me about you before I followed you, and I can see you can see the willingness to grow and the willingness to teach, which I think is a very niche kind of skill to have, to be able to pass this information on to other people. And you have both, which is great. So thank you for what you do as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
I really respect your work a lot. So
what has been we'll say success, right? And success is it's a word, but you've been successful. How has what would you say were some of your biggest things that you did that got that ball rolling? And then also, what are some of the challenges? Because I'm assuming that there have been challenges, and there, like you said, people that talk shit, and I'd love to just hear more about that, because that is it's a cool thing. It's unique, and
I think definitely like willingness to learn, from everything and anything, not just because it's easy to get, stuck in your own thoughts as well about how things should be done. So I've always been quite good at that. And it's interesting because I did this like personality test type thing, and it said that the result came, you're either very indecisive or you're very good at seeing both points. And it's really funny because I am always like, yes, but there's never a definitive answer with me when you ask me a question. So, and I remember the questions being, I can't even remember the questions, but I was like, yeah, but it's contextual, because what if I'm in this state of mind, or what if I'm like having this part of my day? And I think the ability to see various points of views and take them into consideration is really important. Just one sec. I'm just going to get my dog up because he wants to go and swim. Bear with me for a sec. Well, my other one's just jumped in the pool, so now he's like having a meltdown because he's stuck in the office with me. I've got two German Shepherds. One's a Belgian Malinois cross German Shepherd, so they're both a bit crazy. But openness to learn. And then I think the other important thing is really like, one of the things that I always say to people, if you want to level up in everything in life, is keeping those promises to yourself. If you've got your own back, if you can trust yourself, if you know that you can keep your own promises to yourself, everything else is going to open up The highway is going to just be easy flowing. It's going to be easy going
Yeah.
because you've got your own trust, you've
Hmm.
got your own back, your own best friend, and self trust is something that I think a lot of people don't have. And when you've got that, you've got a really strong foundation, you've got a really strong core. So it doesn't matter what people say about me online. And you know what, like I actually don't get that much hate. It's quite funny. When I do, I can see it's projection. But I could easily in the beginning have been like, okay, maybe there's something wrong with me or my content or whatever. But the message that I want to give out, I know that is true to, like, probably biased by my beliefs as well, because sometimes I do talk about things that are a little bit inflammatory. But having your own back means that everything else in life becomes easier. When you start doubting things, you come back to yourself and you start asking yourself like who you are and what you value and what your core is. I think it's a really invaluable skill to have.
Yeah. What was your process of getting there? Do you feel like that was something you always did well, you always did naturally, or was there a very a process to build that self-trust, to build that self-love? I'm assuming that's a huge
Yeah, yes.
as well.
Huge part of it. I mean, I kind of got pushed into it. I got broken up with by my ex, who was a coke addict, and it was ironic because he broke up with me.
Yeah.
And I was a really dark place, And I think I'm not saying that everyone needs to go to the depths of despair to find themselves, but I also want to say that I think in those places, those cracks, those claustrophobic kind of spaces where we don't want to be in, I think that's where the most growth happens.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that it doesn't happen without that, but anyone that's going through those struggles, I think that we learn a lot in those spaces. So it's kind of like the fear, invite it in, accept it, and see what you can learn from it. Because when you've got a low base, you can go up. You
Yeah.
can go anywhere from low. So definitely, like, think small things like, and I've got this in my book, but like if you say you're going to get up at 6, get up at 6. If you say that you want to start running, just do it.
Yeah.
Take what you need out of your life that's taken away from that, and just do it, because we're all tired, we're all hungry, we're all stressed, we all have excuses. The difference is the people that do it are the ones that are gaining self-trust. The people that are not doing it are breaking that relationship with themselves, and that's the difference, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah, I think it's important that we are authentic with ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So I think authenticity of self is such a powerful mission to be on, and that's right. That to me is what you're saying is self trust. Is that
Yeah.
a lot of times when I think about what makes sense, right? Because it's there's so much nuance, but what I fall back on for myself is developing authenticity of self.
Yeah.
And that's easier said than done, right? Like if you're authentic with yourself, you're also going to be able to say like, man, I'm not like, I'm figuring some shit out, right?
Yeah.
If I'm looking at myself in the mirror, I'm like, there's still a long way to go with who I want to be.
Yeah.
And with that process would be that the building of self-trust, that okay, this is where I want to get, therefore I have to do these things. I'm going to get up
Yeah.
at 6 a.m. I'm going to run. I want to be healthy, right?
Yeah. And for me, it was a lot of yoga as well. I mean, I was really in a low place. I just moved to a new city, had no friends. It was a perfect opportunity for me to befriend myself, because when I lived in London, it was like, I can't sit with my own thoughts. I need to text someone. I need to be out. I need to not be alone. I need to watch TV because,
Yeah.
I can't be alone. And I went to a lot of yoga, and I think that really saved me. And I learned so much, and that yoga can be different for everybody. It could be MMA, it could be jiu-jitsu. My partner does jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
It's whatever it is for you, but it's that carving out that time for yourself where you can sit with your thoughts without external stimulus really influencing how you should be feeling, what you should be doing. So I got to learn about who I was, what I wanted, what my values were. Why did I end up in a relationship where I got broken up with by a cocaine addict? I mean, how did I get here in the first place? And a lot of self-reflection. The great thing about the brain is that we're really good at self-reflecting. We're really good at then changing the course of action through errors. So error processing, we can then rectify. So people that have been through, hard times and difficult times, see that as a positive, because that then teaches the brain what to not do the next time, and how to cope with it better.
Yeah.
People then give themselves enough credit for that.
Yeah. I love it. Well, that's about an hour. So I know you're busy. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I really,
Could
really
chat all
appreciate,
day.
yeah, I really appreciate,
Thank you.
you doing this, and I'm excited for the book. I really am.
Thank you.
Is
Yeah, I've
there
just finished it. Yeah, I've just finished writing it. So
okay,
we're going through the major editorial process now. It's available on the 4th of June in the US. It's on available on the 9th of May in the UK. But the exciting thing is I am actually coming to the US for a book tour.
okay.
So
Will you
I'll
be
make
in?
my way to
Yeah,
Arizona. I
yeah. I was
would
gonna say
love
in
to
the
come
West
and
Coast.
see you.
Yeah, well, you got a
That
friend.
is,
Yeah, you've got a friend here. You've got a,
thank
definitely.
you.
If you end up in Arizona, we'll make sure that we're in contact, and you
Yeah.
come to the gym. That'd be great.
Oh my God, that'd
Need a
be my
place to
dream.
stay. You get it. We can definitely take care of you. So
I love that. Thank you. And my partner and I are looking to start. We'd love to. That one of the reasons we want to get a farm is so we can invite people over like you and just
yeah,
learn from other people. So thank
yeah.
you.
No, well,
Got the
maybe
same mindset
we'll
around.
we'll have to
You're
connect.
welcome to save my place.
Yeah, my goal is to. I would love to travel. I would love to go places and really teach what I do, which really
Mm,
is a lot of it now is I think it's stress resiliency through the mind, through the breath, through
yeah,
feeding, like how we actually integrate the ability to be more resilient, right? It's what you're
yeah,
teaching. It's yeah. So
yeah. Would you be open to coming to Madeira?
I would love to. Yeah.
Oh my God, we should definitely talk about that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you,
yeah. We'll
Nicole.
have a chat offline.
Yeah. I appreciate you, my friend.